Welcome back. It's your boy Anye Elite here on the commentary on Icon City News. My next guest says that in the battle for equality, that progressives are playing checkers when they should be playing chess. I'd like to welcome on Mason Scott, the author of Robin's Zugzwang. Zugzwang. How do I pronounce that?
It's a chess term that's actually a German word. It is a little bit of a tongue twister.
It definitely is.
It is, which made it kind of um, an issue whether it was prudent or not to title the book with such a strange kind of esoteric name like Zugzwang. Um, it's a term that I think is apt though, so I kind of went with it.
Well, I like that. No complaints here. So just a little bit of an overview. So Robin Zugzwang, a progressive critique of an errant approach to racial inequality, critiques current approaches to racial justice, particularly what you view as misguided efforts by some progressives. Um, the book goes on to challenge popular ideas like political correctness, identity politics, and performative anti-racism. Um, embodied by such figures whose names we may get into, we may not get into. I know it's a little tricky commenting on other people's work, but you do that a bit in the book. So we may have to reference some of that. Um, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but your main argument is that the approaches from the left so far focus too much on personal interactions, microaggressions, instead of addressing the deeper systemic and structural inequalities that perpetuate racial and economic justice.
Yes.
So, um, tell me what you mean by you think that there should be a more humanistic and collective solutions.
Well, in terms of a humanistic approach, I guess that can be rephrased as um, a cosmopolitan approach, cosmopolitanism in the sense of the philosophical system. Uh, Humanism, per se, I think, is a touchstone from which I work because its most fundamental tenet is human solidarity. Human solidarity meaning the most crucial part of interacting with other people is our shared humanity. That's the primary criterion by which we should govern all of our interactions and determine the best way to um, come together and solve problems that we in a society in which we all exist and in a situation that we often all share as fellow human beings. So human solidarity, I think, is the benchmark from which I work. And um, cosmopolitan ideals in the sense that they are about transcending tribal divisions, which is one of my compunctions with what has come to be known as identity politics, which I think does not sufficiently emphasize the need to transcend tribal divisions and resorts to more of a tribalistic mindset, which I think is part of the problem that needs to be addressed.
We can start with the identity politics. So when you say identity politics, a lot of listeners are going to um, immediately hear that as a popular critique that comes from
The right.
the political right, right? And so, full disclaimer, and I should have said this in the beginning of the interview, but um, I know Mason outside of I've met Mason before outside of the interview, and so I do know you to be a person who shows up as an ally to various groups, and we'll get into a little bit how some of those groups influenced your writing, but all that being said is that we're gonna keep it real here, right? So with that critique that, because the idea when the right says, identity politics, there's this argument that, well, if we all more so focused on, being American, and I know you speak in global ways, but to make it a little bit domestic, if we all focused on, our shared identity as Americans, things, would be better, and racism and all the other isms, would be less if we focused on our collective. Others though, see that as telling people to assimilate and to have less pride in their identities, to um kind of ignore the things that make them special. So how is um what you're suggesting in terms of identity and tribalism, how is that different? How is that?
Well, the critique from the right, as you say, that's correct. They downplay the need for marginalized communities to embrace their identities, specifically as marginalized communities, which is crucial and very important. And that is, of course, kind of dismissed by um, the right. Um, that is not what I'm saying. Of course, my critique of identity politics is from the left, not the right. And that is a very crucial point. You are right to say that oftentimes when we hear um, criticism of identity politics, political correctness, it's coming from right wing polemicists who do not share the ideals that, I mean, it's almost the antithesis of the ideals that I'm promoting. So that distinction is crucial. Not all criticisms are coming from the same place or based on the same principles. I
But I guess, if I may, um but fundamentally though, what is the difference between your critique and the right's critique? Is there no fundamental difference, and just your intention behind offering is the fundamental difference? Or like, yeah, go ahead.
The fundamental difference is they're coming from the exact opposite direction and based on principles that are almost diametrically opposed to each other. So my criticism coming from the left rather than from the right is based on principles that are, I would say, the antithesis of the principles that drive right wing critiques. So it is very important to make the point that there are criticisms of identity politics from a progressive point of view, critiques of what's sometimes called political correctness from a progressive point, would not to be related with a right wing critique, which is from a
So give me an example. Give me
basically the opposite, an opposite set of ideals. And I think the assumption is often made that if you hear any critique of these things that are often associated with the left, scare quotes, it's automatically some kind of right wing critique. And that's obviously not the case because here I am.
for sure, for sure. And we're all familiar with it almost reminds me of a guy named James Carville. He's a ex Clinton campaign guy, and now a professor over in over at LSU, Louisiana State University, not Loyola. And so he's very critical too of the right. I guess my question would be, what is an example recently though of where the in your view the left got it wrong on identity politics?
Oh, goodness. My giving specific examples that are very recent off the top of my head might not be my strong suit. I usually talk in theory more than giving specific recent examples. Um, the I guess I guess any situation in which um, the attempt to empower a marginalized community, whether it's the LGBTQ community with whom I work on a daily basis, as you know, um, marginalized racial groups, Latino, African American, etc., or any other marginalized group, the attempt to empower them by resorting to a casting them in terms of a specific demographic profile I think can often yield misguided attempts to rectify social injustices. So, of course, the idea, the attempt is noble, but I think often misguided and ends up what the way I put it is the movement, an otherwise noble movement is shooting itself in the foot oftentimes by trying to accomplish the goal of affecting social justice and eradicating systemic racism by resorting to a different kind of tribalistic mindset when I contend that getting rid of a tribalistic mindset altogether is ultimately the solution that we need to be aiming for.
Okay. So I will say that I do know, as I'm sure you do as well, the LGBT movement and many aspects of the Black equality movement. It goes by so many different names. The names change so much, because a word is targeted and made, there's just so much critique of the movement. The critique sometimes, a lot of times, becomes, louder than the nobility of it. My main question before we go to break is tribalism bad if it is inclusive? Because I personally find the LGBT and Black progressive movements to be tremendously inclusive of people in how members can identify and space for allies. So do you think, um, is tribalism in your mind, is it defined as exclusive?
Yes. So maybe we're using tribalism in two different ways. I would say that tribalism, the way I'm referring to it, is inherently dysfunctional
Okay.
and that it needs to be eschewed altogether. Um, this is not to say that recognizing and identifying a marginalized community along demographic lines is not crucial. Of course, it's crucial. You have to identify the parameters of those who are being marginalized and along which lines they're being marginalized. That's the diagnostic part of solving the problem. What I'm contending is retaining the tribalistic mindset when you're formulating solutions can lead to problems and simply shift the dysfunction into a different context. So I guess it ends up recasting the problem rather than solving the problem. Um, I guess the other aspect of what I'm saying is the political correctness aspect that I'm indicting. And I define political correctness as weaponized etiquette, which is primarily on on the interpersonal level rather than at the structural level. I think the reason that is ineffective and often counterproductive is that it tends to have us fixate on interpersonal relations rather than on power structures and the way that structures work. So, what I like to say to convey that point is we can prevent white guy Bob from um, fumbling with uh, what might be called a microaggression at his workplace around the water cooler, thereby being very offensive to some of the people of color, some of his colleagues that might be people of color at the workplace. We can curb those microaggressions till the cows come home and never in 1,000 years solve any of the structural problems. So my concern is if we become too preoccupied with things at the personal level, we end up diverting time and attention from the more crucial problems which exist at the structural level. And we can talk about proper etiquette till we're blue in the face for the next, to the end of eternity and never end up doing a thing about um, power structures and how they actually operate. And that's my primary concern.
Okay. If it's all right with you, do you mind sticking around after the break? I have a few more questions to ask. Like I said, you did critique some other work, so we want to go ahead and engage in that discussion as well. And then I did want to follow up regarding the political correctness discussion. So we'll be right back with more with Mason Scott. As you can tell, I'm really excited because we dropped some new merch today. Alrighty, so not only can you get this Icon City News t-shirt that I'm wearing, but also we have the Icon City mug with the coffee. We actually also sell coffee. Can you believe it? That's all on iconcitynews.com or the marketplace. And then we got this cool Prosecutor versus the Felon tee. Now, people have been telling me that it might have something to do with stuff that's going on in the world today. And I just want to let you know, it doesn't really. It's about a series that's coming to Icon City News that is going to be highlighting just like big cases with famous prosecutors and famous felons. But I mean, if you want to make a statement with that, you can. There's handbags and stuff. And, if you're not so, I mean, listen, rather you for the prosecutor or for the felon, like, once you watch the show, it's going every other episode you might be for, the other, or you might be split because, we got some crazy prosecutors out there and, even crazier felons. So I don't know if this is something that's up your alley, check it out on Icon City News. Guys, it's Anye here at the Marsha P. Johnson Youth Drop-In Center. Sure does.
And so the brothers, I think, do a wonderful job taking care of the community. So tonight, we're taking care of ourselves and our members in crisis.
Good to see you. Hey, baby. So
it's reversible fun today.
y'all check out Holy Smoke.
I gotta tell y'all, Icon City off the chart. One booking with them, my place was packed from the moment we opened to the moment we closed. As a matter of fact, we ran out of everything. So many people came through. Big shout out to Icon. Big shout out. Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back, guys. So, as promised, we are back with Mason Scott, the author of Robin's Zugzwang. Okay. Who's Robin?
It does refer to Robin DiAngelo. The book is not primarily about Robin DiAngelo per se. What I do, and I explain this in the introduction, is I use her as kind of a foil for didactic purposes because of her prominence in years past. I feel like she is a well-known representative of the approach that I'm critiquing. So I feel like she's a good standard bearer, and therefore a good way of labeling an approach that most people are familiar with and associate with her, as well as perhaps maybe Ibram X. Kendi, who I also mentioned. So Zugzwang is a predicament in chess where you put your opponent in a situation where they are forced to make a move that is against their own interests. They may or may not realize that they are being forced to make this move, but they are put in a predicament where they end up having to make a move that they may or may not think is to their advantage, but is actually going against their better interest. And so I use that as an analogy for what this approach basically does to the progressive movement.
So then would it be your position that, someone like the Republican candidate for president, who himself has been probably one of the most outspoken opponents of political correctness, do you believe then that the microaggressions and such are purposely come from that movement to distract, or in other words, place progressives in the Zugzwang?
I would say that it's a very mixed bag. It's hard to make generalizations. So there are all kinds of different scenarios that exist. But I do make the point that the emphasis on political correctness and the use of identity politics ultimately ends up playing in the favor of incumbent power structures.
Okay.
So when we devote all of our time and energy to fixating on what I would call weaponized etiquette and quibbling between identity groups within the working class, it's music to the ears of those wielding corporate power, because what it does is it partitions the working class into quibbling identity groups rather than bringing the working class together. And working class solidarity, and more importantly, human solidarity, I would say, is a more effective way of standing up to incumbent power structures that are primarily responsible for perpetuating racial and other social injustices. So they are happy to encourage people to continue in this vein. They're happy to promote this, what I would say is a dysfunctional approach, under the guise of progressivism, under quasi progressive pretenses. Um, but in my estimation, a lot of it ends up just being a bunch of cloying theatrics and distractions that divert attention away from the structural problems that we should be focused on. Some people call that virtue signaling. Some people might call it performative morality. A lot of it is about optics and mouthing the right platitudes, paying the right lip service. A lot of it is just savvy PR to placate um, aggrieved groups and come off as if you care about their plight when you're really doing nothing to solve the structural problems that are really underpinning the continued social injustices that we're trying to contend with. So, like I said before, what ends up happening is uh, people who engage in this approach shoot an otherwise good cause in the foot and end up doing maybe more harm than good.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So they are rapping me, and there is a lot of stuff that I wanted to get into. I wanted to get into personally your personal journey. So I just want to touch on that. Well, unfortunately, I hope you come back so we can touch on that as well. Also, I wanted to you have some interesting ideas about universal policies, and I wanted to uh, get your take on how you believe the Democratic candidate is doing in terms of um, dealing with the microaggression. So I want you, I guess, you to answer that. Is she doing a good job at focusing on universal policies? And then tell everyone where to get it.
Okay, so I mean, it's a long conversation. Um, I am praying that Kamala Harris prevails in a few weeks. It's a nail biter, and I'm very nervous because the alternative is horrifying. I do critique the Democratic Party from the left, to be very clear. My compunctions with the Democratic Party primarily lie in the fact that I think it's too far to the right. However, the far left, the caricature of the far left that's often bandied about in media, I also do not align with, paradoxically, because that is associated with going too far with identity politics and political correctness. So I'm kind of hard to kind of pinpoint in terms of on the conventional spectrum that people often use to make sense of where people lie politically. But I think that she is not.
Before you go so far in it, and I'm so sorry to cut you off, I do want to thank you very much for coming on. Okay, and I want to continue this conversation, but before I let you go, please tell everyone where they can find Robin's Zugzwang.
Oh, well, it's on Amazon. I have my pre-press copy here. So it's Robin Zugzwang, a progressive critique of an errant approach to racial inequality. I'm critiquing what I think is a flawed approach and offering a better way of approaching racial inequality that I think would be more effective. Is Kamala doing a good job? I think she could do a lot better, to be frank. I think she has.
Thank you so much for that. I am so sorry. I have an 11:30.
Oh,
That's what has happened. So, do you want to? We please come back.
yeah. I'll come back and elaborate.
Please come back. And we will get more into this. I think your view would be very useful, and we discussed this. Very useful on a variety of different topics. Contextualized through Robinson. So, thank you so much, Mason.
Thank you.
So we didn't really get to get into everything that we want to get into. So I do want to thank Mason for stopping by. And like I said, or you definitely want to have him back. Obviously, you know, we definitely disagree, and I want to have him on again, so we can kind of get into that. So I won't we won't get too far into it while he's not here, alrighty? But when we come back, we got another interview. I told you interview is the theme of the show. So you definitely want to keep it locked here for that. This is the commentary on iConCityNews.